The purpose of this video is to describe to the user how to navigate within the 3D volume. This video was recorded using CubeVue version 2809. Most of the features that are described in this video are also available in earlier versions of CubeVue as well. The first step in navigating through a 3D volume is determining the proper orientation. The easiest way to do that is to look up in the upper left viewing window. That's the 3D rendering window. And the 3D image that we see is the same as if the patient was standing there in front of us as far as orientation goes, and they were facing us. So looking at this foot, we can determine that this is the patient's left foot. Now, to determine the orientation of the patient in your remaining views, your axial view in the upper right, your coronal view in the lower right, and your sagittal view in the lower left, look to see if you have orientation markers for anterior, posterior, right and left, and head and foot. If you do, that tells us that you are scanning your patients in Acquisition Software version 6.0 or higher, and you're also viewing them in CubeVue version 2809 or higher. So if you do have the orientation markers, you also need to determine, are we looking at this image in the axial view from the bottom up or the top down? Going to the upper left corner, all the way at the top, the Systems tab, select Settings, then go to Options. Under View System, by default, the radiology view, which is the standard or convention looking from the bottom up, should be selected. That means your axial view, you are looking from the bottom up. You can also select the patient-centric view. If that is selected in the axial view, you will be looking at the patient image from the top down, and you will also find that the left and right orientation markers will be reversed. Looking now at a 2-foot scan, let's determine not only where are we in 3D space, but also are we looking at the patient's left foot or the right foot. First of all, notice if we have our orientation markers, R stands for the patient's right, L stands for the patient's left. So with these 2 feet, we know that the foot closest to the R is the patient's right foot, and the foot closest to the L is the patient's left foot. If we're not using the radiographic view, but rather the patient-centric view, where we're looking from the top down, the L and the R will be switched, and we'll be looking at the corresponding patient foot. Clicking on the axial image in the upper left, we see that the axial image is surrounded by a red border. That means our axial slice will be identified by a red slab line in the 3D volume. Our coronal image is surrounded by a blue border, and it will correspond to the location in 3D space of the blue slab line. The sagittal image in the lower left will correspond to the position in 3D space of the green line. Notice in the sagittal image in the lower left, we see nothing. We don't see any anatomy. And that's because when we look in the axial view or the coronal view, we see that the green line is running right between the 2 feet. If I grab this green line and move it over to the left, by left clicking on that line, I can now move the green line over, and the image in the lower left, the sagittal image, is the patient's right foot. Again, I can determine this, the position of the green line is running through the foot that is closest to the R, or the patient's right. So we know that the sagittal view, surrounded by the green border, we are looking at the patient's right foot. Now, it's important to note, if we have an image that does not have our orientation markers, anterior or posterior, and especially right or left, that means that we are dealing with an older patient scan, a patient who was scanned on a version of the acquisition software prior to version 6.0. It is important to note or remember that by default we are using the patient-centric view, not the radiology view, on a scan where we do not see the orientation markers. And by that we mean the left foot that we see here is the patient's left, and the foot that's on the right is the patient's right. Same in the coronal view. Again, if we don't see the orientation markers, R left is the patient's left, R right is the patient's right. So if I grab a green line and move it onto the left foot, which is the patient's left, I know I am now looking at a patient's left foot. Back to our earlier 2-foot scan, where we do have our orientation markers, and the radiology view has been selected, I know that this foot I am circling is the patient's right foot, and this is the patient's left foot. Same in the coronal views as well. Whichever foot is closer to our right and left orientation markers, that is the corresponding patient foot. We also noted that if I left click on the green line or the red line or the blue line and it's highlighted, I can then left click holding the left mouse button down, drag it through the 3D volume, and the position of my sagittal slice will change. I can even grab two lines at the same time. Notice I have a four-way arrow now. Left click, hold it down. Notice that as I'm left clicking and holding it down, the slab lines become brighter. And I can move both lines to a location in the 3D volume. So the location I am looking at in each of the images corresponds to where the different colored lines intersect on each of the images. Again, we know that we're looking at the patient's left foot and we're looking at the talus bone. Again, I can grab two lines. We're right in the middle of the talus bone in all three images. That's the patient's left talus bone because the green slab line is closest to the left indicator. Now I can double click on any image and it will bring it full screen. Double click again and it brings it back to four equally sized images. So double clicking, I can't grab the green line for the sagittal image because it's not present here. So how do I scroll through here if I can't grab the green line and move it? If I grab either one of these two lines and move it, I will be moving the corresponding images that are not visible, the red for axial and the blue for coronal. So to move the green line, I'm going to left click on the image, but not touching the red line and not touching the blue line. Left click, hold the mouse down. I'm going to very slowly move my mouse up. And as you can see, I'm advancing through the images. And I'm left clicking and grabbing anywhere except on the line. And I'm moving the mouse down. What is my position in 3D space? Well, if I double click, I can go back and check to see where the green line is. I'm still on the patient's left foot. When you have an image full screen, it becomes a little more difficult to determine are you on the patient's left foot or the right foot when you're in the sagittal view. So it would help to know what foot you're on before you double click to bring the image full screen. I am only using my fingertips to move the mouse very slowly, just a couple of millimeters at a time, and I can advance very quickly through the volume. I have two other ways that I can scroll through the volume as well. One is to use the scroll wheel on my mouse if I happen to be using a regular mouse as opposed to the touchpad. And as I scroll, you'll notice that the image is changing. I'm advancing through the volume. Scrolling in the opposite direction, I will advance through the volume in the opposite direction. Double clicking to go back to my 3D and MPR images. If I scroll on any one image, you would also see some movement of the slab line corresponding to the image that I am scrolling on. Again, I'm just using the wheel of the mouse. If I want to scroll faster through this image when I bring it full screen, I can also press and hold the shift key. I'm now pressing and holding the shift key. I'm scrolling with the wheel of the mouse and I'm jumping 10 slices at a time. Keep in mind that these slices are only about 0.3 to 0.4 millimeters thick, so we're jumping through about 3 to 4 millimeters at a time with each mouse click while I'm pressing and holding the shift key. The methods of scrolling through the volume that we have seen, grabbing the cursor lines and moving them, scrolling with the wheel of the mouse, or scrolling with the wheel of the mouse by pressing the shift key, are available in the earlier versions of CubeVue. The one difference between the earlier versions and the current version, which is 2809 at the time of this recording, is the fact that later versions of ACQ, or acquisition software, and CubeVue will also give you the orientation markers and the ability to switch between radiologic view and patient-centric view. So a quick recap. This video was recorded using CubeVue version 2809. All of the features described here are found in 2809. Most of the features are found in earlier versions of CubeVue as well. Two items in particular that are found in 2809 are the orientation markers, right and left, anterior, posterior, you must also be running acquisition software version 6.0 or higher in order for the orientation markers to appear. You also have the ability to switch between patient-centric view, where you're looking from the top down at your feet, in which your left is the patient's left and your right is the patient's right, or as shown here, the radiographic view, where you're looking from the bottom of the patient up, and that setting can be changed under System, Settings, and Options. To upgrade to version 2809 and also Acquisition Software 6.0, if you're not running at those versions already, please contact CurveBeam Technical Support. Upgrading to later versions of ACQ is done by appointment only. And if you're also running an older version of the system where you have a different server configuration, you may also have to reconfigure your server as well, which needs to be done by a tech person on site. So again, contact CurveBeam Technical Support for more information and to arrange for an upgrade.